Welcome to the war. The smell of scorched metal and burnt flesh lingered in the air over Outpost Vega 6. The battlefield stretched for miles, a wasteland of craters, shattered bunkers, and the remains of war machines that once belonged to both sides. Smoke curled from the wreckage, painting the sky in sickly shades of gray and orange. Amid the devastation, Havoc Team sat against a collapsed bunker, their armor stained with blood, some of it theirs, some belonging to the enemy. Captain Derricole adjusted the makeshift bandage around his leg, wincing as he pulled it tight. His men weren't much better. Sergeant James Bear Lawson, the team's heavy gunner, had a deep gash along his ribs. Staff Sergeant Luis Ortega, their combat engineer, was nursing a busted arm. Corporal Ethan Park had taken a plasma burn across his shoulder, and their sniper, Warrant Officer Joel Ghost Carter, had a cracked visor from a near miss. They were hurt. They were exhausted, but they were alive. And then the Xel'Dar landed. A line of sleek, silver dropships descended from the storm-choked sky, their engines humming with energy far beyond anything human-made. The 87th Galactic Legion, the so-called elite of the Xel'Dar Empire, marched out in perfect formation, tall, blue-skinned warriors clad in segmented armor that pulsed with artificial musculature. Each of them was bred for war, their DNA modified for strength, endurance, and speed. They looked down at the wounded humans with undisguised contempt. At the head of the Xel'Dar force stood Commander Valzorn, his polished crimson armor marking him as superior even among his kind. His violet eyes flicked over Havoc Team with amusement. "These are the human warriors we were sent to reinforce," he scoffed, his voice carrying an arrogant lilt. "Pathetic." The Xel'Dar soldiers around him chuckled. One of them, a lieutenant, sneered. "They barely stand. Did they lose to the Vrak? Or did they simply fall over from their own weakness?" Cole exhaled slowly, reining in his temper. He'd dealt with alien arrogance before, but something about the Xel'Dar always grated on him. They saw themselves as the pinnacle of warfare, superior to every species they encountered, including humanity. "Nice of you to show up," Cole said, ignoring the insult. "You're only about, 3 days late?" Valzorn smirked. "We arrived exactly when we meant to. It's not our fault your species lacks the endurance for true war." Bear chuckled, his voice a deep rumble. "That's so? You ever fought the Vrak before, pretty boy?" Valzorn's smirk faded slightly, but he recovered quickly. "We have trained for war against them. Their tactics are predictable. Their brute strength is nothing against Xel'Dar precision." Park scoffed. "Yeah? Well, that brute strength wiped out half our division." Valzorn barely looked at him. "Then perhaps humanity was never meant to fight in this war." That was enough for Ortega. The engineer pushed himself up, his injured arm cradled against his chest. "You think this is a joke? You think you're better than us because you've got fancy tech and designer genes." He spat onto the dirt. "Let me tell you something, Commander. We held this damn outpost for 2 weeks with nothing but grit and bullets while you sat in orbit doing God knows what." The Xel'Dar murmured among themselves, but Valzorn remained unimpressed. He tilted his head as if observing an interesting, but ultimately unimpressive specimen. "And yet, you are broken." Cole finally stood, pain lancing through his leg. He ignored it. "We're still here." For a brief moment, something flickered in Valzorn's gaze, curiosity, perhaps. But it was gone in an instant, replaced with his usual condescension. "Stay in your bunker, Captain. We will handle the next battle. Try not to slow us down." With that, Valzorn turned on his heel, his soldiers following in lockstep. They moved toward the forward trenches, where the Vrak would likely make their next push. Ortega shook his head. "Arrogant pricks." Bear grunted. "They'll learn soon enough." Cole watched the Xel'Dar leave, jaw clenched. He had no love for them, but he didn't wish failure on them either. If the Xel'Dar truly thought the Vrak were predictable, they were in for a rude awakening. Ghost finally spoke, his voice quiet but certain. "They don't respect us." Cole exhaled. "They will." Above them, the first ominous screeches of the Vrak carried through the air. The next battle was coming, and when the time came, the Xel'Dar would find out firsthand why underestimating humanity was always a mistake. The fall of arrogance. The first sign of the Vrak attack was the silence. For hours, the battlefield had been filled with the sounds of Xel'Dar patrols, the hum of their energy weapons charging, and the smug chatter of soldiers who thought the fight was already won. But now all of that faded. The air grew still. The wind carried a faint clicking sound, soft, rapid, and unnatural. Havoc Team knew what was coming. Cole tightened the grip on his rifle, exchanging glances with his men. They were still battered, still hurting, but none of that mattered now. They had fought the Vrak before. They knew what the Xel'Dar were about to face. "They don't hear it," Ghost muttered. "They don't want to hear it," Ortega corrected. Out in the forward trenches, the 87th Galactic Legion stood ready. Their armor glowed under the eerie light of Vega 6's twin moons, their weapons humming with barely contained power. Commander Valzorn stood at the front, his crimson-clad form exuding confidence. "Positions!" Valzorn's voice rang out, and the Xel'Dar warriors snapped into formation. Perfect, precise, predictable. Cole shook his head. He had seen this play out before. The Xel'Dar were bred for war, but they fought in rigid doctrine, clean engagements, controlled battles. They believed war was about superiority, about standing tall over their enemies. But the Vrak weren't enemies. They were predators. The clicking grew louder. Then the shadows moved. The Vrak swarmed in from the darkness, a tide of writhing bodies, glistening chitin, and razor-sharp limbs. They didn't charge in neat battle lines. They flowed like liquid death, climbing over each other, leaping from rock formations, emerging from beneath the very ground the Xel'Dar stood on. The first Xel'Dar soldier barely had time to scream before a Vrak tore him in half. Then chaos erupted. The Xel'Dar fired in perfect, coordinated bursts, their energy rifles cutting through the initial wave. But for every Vrak that fell, 3 more replaced it. The swarm adapted instantly, their exoskeletons darkening, shifting. Soon, the energy blasts weren't cutting through as cleanly. Valzorn barked orders, demanding his soldiers hold the line. But the Vrak didn't fight the line. They went through it. They leapt over trenches, landed among the Xel'Dar ranks, and carved through them with wickedly sharp limbs. Screams filled the air. The once proud soldiers of the 87th Galactic Legion, who had laughed at humanity hours ago, were now dying by the dozens. Some tried to retreat, but the Vrak anticipated their movements, cutting off escape routes. In less than 10 minutes, the Xel'Dar's perfect defense shattered. Back at the bunker, Havoc Team watched. They weren't smug. They weren't celebrating. They had seen this happen to too many other armies before. Ortega exhaled. And there it is. Valzorn was still fighting, swinging a glowing blade in wide arcs, cutting down any Vrak that got too close. But even he had lost the arrogance from before. The precise formation he had commanded was gone. His soldiers were no longer warriors. They were prey. Then it happened. A Vrak devourer, twice the size of a normal soldier, its exoskeleton gleaming black and red, burst from underground, tackling Valzorn to the ground. The proud commander struggled, roaring in fury as he stabbed his blade deep into the creature's neck. It screeched but didn't stop. It pinned him down, mandibles snapping inches from his face. And just like that, Valzorn, the proud leader of the 87th Galactic Legion, was seconds from death. Cole sighed. Ghost! A single shot rang out. The massive Vrak's skull exploded, its body slumping over Valzorn. The Xel'Dar commander gasped, shoving the corpse aside, his once pristine armor now smeared with alien gore. He looked around, disoriented, before his eyes locked on a Havoc Team, and the sniper still holding his smoking rifle. Ghost gave him a lazy 2-finger salute. The battlefield had changed. The Xel'Dar, once so confident, were now broken. Those who survived were running, some to the bunker, others toward the transports. The Vrak were overrunning everything. And just like that, the fight came to them. Dozens of Xel'Dar survivors stumbled into the bunker, their arrogance stripped away. Their faces were wild with fear. Valzorn himself was among them, his expression no longer one of superiority. For the first time since they met him, he looked human. He looked afraid. His eyes met Cole's, and he hesitated before speaking. "What do we do?" Cole exhaled, standing slowly, feeling the weight of his injuries but pushing them aside. Wounded doesn't mean weak. Valzorn's face was pale, his violet eyes wide with something that had been absent before: fear. The once mighty Xel'Dar commander, who had laughed at wounded human soldiers just hours ago, now stood among the broken remains of his own men. Cole had seen that look before. The realization that death was closer than pride. Outside the bunker, the Vraks swarmed over the trenches, feasting on the bodies of the fallen. Their chittering cries echoed through the night, a sound that sent a shiver through even the most hardened soldier. Inside, the Xel'Dar survivors huddled together. Their armor was dented, their weapons low on power. They were shaking, some in pain, others in shock. Cole didn't hesitate. He didn't have time to coddle them. "You listen now," he repeated, "or you die." Valzorn swallowed but nodded. The arrogance was gone. The battlefield had burned it away. Cole turned to his team. "We've fought these bastards before. They adapt fast, but they're not invincible. Energy weapons are losing effectiveness. That means we go kinetic." Ortega, despite his injured arm, cracked a grin. "Good thing we like bullets." Cole nodded. "Bear, get the heavy machine gun set up in the corridor. Ghost, find a high spot. Watch our flanks. Hark, set up some claymores at the choke points." "Ortega." "Booms?" Ortega asked, already reaching into his pack. Cole smirked. "Big booms." The Xel'Dar soldiers looked between each other in confusion. "You would use primitive weapons?" one of them asked. Cole didn't even look at him. "Primitive works just fine when you aim right." He pointed at a stack of discarded Xel'Dar rifles. "Those won't do much except make noise. If you got sidearms with slug rounds, use those. Otherwise, grab something that punches holes." One of the Xel'Dar soldiers hesitated, but Valzorn picked up a fallen human rifle, a battered but functional M4A1 carbine, and slung it over his shoulder. "If this is how we survive," he said grimly, "then so be it." Cole almost smiled. Almost. The first wave came within minutes. The Vrak, sensing fresh prey inside the bunker, surged toward the entrance. The first few were met with a thunderous roar of Bear's M240B, the heavy machine gun ripping through chitin and bone. Unlike energy weapons, bullets didn't just burn the Vrak. They tore them apart. Ghost, perched above the entryway on a makeshift sniper perch, dropped one of the larger Vrak with a precise shot through the eye socket. More came. The clicking and screeching grew louder. Hart's claymores went off in rapid succession. The bunker shook as fire and shrapnel shredded through the swarm. The Xel'Dar flinched and used to such chaotic warfare, but Havoc Team barely reacted. They'd seen worse. Then came the second wave, smarter, angrier. The Vrak had learned to avoid the entryway. Instead, they climbed the walls, crawled through vents, forced their way in from the ceiling. "Breach, right flank." Ortega bellowed. Cole turned just in time to see a Vrak warrior burst through a maintenance hatch, talons flashing. A Xel'Dar soldier was too slow. He screamed as the creature impaled him. Cole didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, jammed his knife into the Vrak's throat, and fired his sidearm into its skull. The body slumped to the floor, twitching. The Xel'Dar who had hesitated earlier stared at him. "Now, how do you fight like this?" Cole exhaled. "Because we have to." Valzorn stepped beside him, rifle in hand. "Then teach us." The Xel'Dar learned fast. They had been bred for war, but now they were learning to fight like humans, dirty, brutal, efficient. They abandoned their rigid formations and moved with Havoc Team, using cover, setting ambushes, adapting to each attack. One Xel'Dar soldier, formerly hesitant, picked up a fallen human shotgun and blasted a Vrak at close range. The creature's exoskeleton shattered. The soldier blinked in shock, then grinned. Another, wounded but determined, used his strength to haul heavy debris into a barricade, sealing off an entry point. Valzorn, his crimson armor now scratched and blood-stained, moved with Cole, covering his flank as they pushed back against the swarm. "Your tactics," Valzorn grunted as he fired a burst into a Vrak's mouth. "They are insane." Cole smirked. "Welcome to humanity." The battle raged for hours. But by dawn, the bunker still stood. The Xel'Dar, once so confident in their genetic superiority, were now covered in sweat and grime. Their weapons were human-made, their armor scarred, their faces hardened. They weren't the same soldiers who had laughed at Havoc Team. Valzorn looked at Cole, exhaustion in his eyes. "We would not have survived without you." Cole exhaled, reloading his rifle. "No, you wouldn't have." Outside, the Vrak were regrouping for another assault. They weren't done yet, but neither was humanity, live to regret. The bunker walls were scarred from battle, the ground littered with the bodies of fallen Vrak and shattered armor plates. The air was thick with the stench of burned chitin and blood. But despite the exhaustion weighing down on them, Havoc Team and the remaining Xel'Dar still stood. Cole took a slow breath, listening. The chittering outside had lessened, replaced by a deep, unsettling quiet. The Vrak weren't gone. They were thinking, adapting. The next attack would be worse. Ghost, still perched above, scanned the horizon through his scope. "They're regrouping," he murmured. "Looks like they've learned not to charge in blind." Valzorn stood beside Cole, gripping the human rifle he had taken. His armor, once pristine, was now smeared with Vrak blood. His expression hardened from the night's brutality. The arrogance was gone. "What's their next move?" he asked, his tone no longer condescending, but respectful. Cole studied the terrain outside. The Vrak were smart. They had tested the bunker's defenses and taken heavy losses. They wouldn't waste more bodies on a frontal assault. "They'll try to flush us out," Cole said. "Hit us with something bigger, something we haven't seen yet." A distant, guttural screech cut through the morning air. The ground trembled slightly beneath their feet. Ortega sighed, wiping sweat from his face. "I hate being right." Ghost adjusted his rifle scope. His voice was calm, but even he sounded wary. "Got eyes on something big. It's moving toward us from the ridgeline. Looks like a well shit. I don't even know what to call that." Cole didn't need to see it to know it was bad. "Give me details." Ghost exhaled. "Think, Vrak Titan, bigger than a tank, got reinforced armor plating, and, oh, it's carrying a siege cannon on its back." The bunker was strong, but it wasn't indestructible. One direct hit from something like that, and they were gone. Valzorn's grip on his rifle tightened. "Then we take the fight to them." Cole turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "You sure about that, Commander? That's not really your style." Valzorn didn't rise to the bait. He just nodded. "It is now." Cole smirked. "Good." The counterattack. They moved fast. Havoc Team and the remaining Xel'Dar soldiers slipped out of the bunker, using the smoke and wreckage as cover. Ghost stayed behind to provide overwatch, his sniper rifle trained on the battlefield. Bear carried the last of the heavy ordnance. 2 shoulder-fired rockets, the only thing they had that could crack that Titan's armor. As they moved through the ruins, the clicking sounds of the Vrak filled the air once more. The swarm was still out there, hiding in the shadows, waiting. Cole motioned for them to split into 2 teams, Havoc Team on one side, Valzorn leading the remaining Xel'Dar on the other. For the first time, the Xel'Dar weren't treating this as a battle. They were treating it as a hunt. And then, the Titan appeared. It was massive, easily 4 stories tall, its body reinforced with thick, black chitin. Its eyes burned with an eerie blue glow, and a massive siege cannon on its back whirred to life, charging with pulsating energy. They had seconds before it fired. "Ghost!" Cole barked. A single, precise sniper shot rang out, striking one of the Titan's glowing eyes. The beast shrieked, stumbling as the shot disrupted its targeting. The cannon's blast went wide, scorching a deep trench into the battlefield, but missing the bunker. "Go!" Cole roared. Valzorn and his soldiers charged from one side, laying down suppressive fire with human rifles and close combat plasma blades. The Vrak forces turned to meet them, momentarily distracted. That was all Havoc Team needed. Bear dropped to one knee, launching the first rocket. It slammed into the Titan's side, blowing apart a chunk of its armored plating. It wasn't enough. The Titan roared, turning toward them. The siege cannon began charging again. Cole locked eyes with Bear. No more time. Bear didn't hesitate. He dropped the empty launcher, grabbed the last rocket, and aimed. The Titan's mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged, serrated teeth. It roared, its breath hot enough to warp the air around it. Bear grinned. Swallow this, ugly. The second rocket shot straight into its open maw. The explosion blew its entire head apart. The Titan swayed for a moment, then collapsed, crushing several smaller vrak beneath its massive bulk. Silence. Then, cheering. The remaining Xel'Dar, battered and bloodied, roared in victory. Valzorn stepped forward, breathing heavily as he looked at the remains of the Titan. Then he turned to Cole, true respect in his eyes. We would have all died if not for you. Cole dusted himself off. Yeah, you would have. Valzorn chuckled, a genuine, weary laugh. I regret underestimating you, human. Cole looked out over the battlefield. The Vrak forces were in retreat, their greatest weapon destroyed. He exhaled. Don't feel bad. A lot of people make that mistake. Valzorn nodded. Never again. The battle for Vega 6 was over. The Xel'Dar had once believed themselves superior, above humanity in every way. But now they knew the truth. They would never look at humans the same way again.